Ah, the Prusa XL, the almost forgotten big child of the Prusa family. These were originally announced in late 2021, but between worldwide supply chain issues with everything, you only started seeing them out in the wild in late 2023. Today, I'm finally taking a look at it because it's still a printer that intrigues me, especially with the potential that the 5-head tool changer brings. So, while I originally just wanted to do sort of a first look style video, this ended up evolving into much more of a full-on review because I just kept printing stuff with the XL, playing with the things that it can and cannot do, and I feel like I've got a pretty good understanding of the machine by now. That took me a while, and I did run into a couple of issues along the way, so I'm going to take you along for that journey. In here is a solid and very unique machine that does things in its own way, and they do sort of make sense in their own way. And this printer is like an ogre. It has layers. And this video is brought to you by Flexispot. This is one of their standing desks, the E7Q. And it's also what I think is the biggest pain with normal standing desks. It doesn't wobble. My previous standing desk was supposed to be one of the most rigid ones you could get, but it still only has 2 stick legs going up. So when it's at my standing height, whenever I move, I can see my screen shake. The Flexispot Odin E7Q doubles up the number of motors, 2 in the front, 2 in the back, and there is just zero rock happening. With a 660-pound load capacity, this would even make for a very competent workbench. I could use a 40mm oak tabletop and mount my 480-pound lathe on here and still have room to spare. But you get the point. Whether you use the E7Q as a desk or as a workbench, it's really solid. If your budget is limited, you can check out their E7 Plus, which uses 2 motors and a clever linkage to still drive all 4 legs, and it only costs as much as other 2-legged desks in the market. They are generally well-built tables, and Flexispot offers a 15-year warranty on the E7 series to back that up. They've got a huge selection of desks and chairs in all shapes and sizes at extremely competitive prices. Upgrade your ergonomics and check out Flexispot at the link below. Let's start at the beginning. This is the assembled version of the 5-head tool changer Prusa XL, but going by the fact that there are tools included and the printer is still missing a bunch of critical parts, it's not fully totally assembled. For this 5 toolhead version, it took me another 2.5 hours to get it printing. And because it's an XL, you also get an XL bag of Haribo with it, which is going to be more than enough for the assembly and then some. For transport reasons, you get to install the screen yourself, as well as all 5 tools and their parking attachments. As always, the Prusa manuals are excruciatingly detailed. I wish they made a TLDR version that mentions just the stuff that isn't intuitive, because like this, I just end up glossing over it and missing one or the other important bits. This one went pretty well though, but I did find out that there was some shipping damage on my machine. The left side filament inlet got smashed, but because it's a simple printed part, you can just go onto printables, get the STL and print a new one. The fact that it got broken does kinda suck, but you know what? Using printed parts for printers still makes a lot of sense to me. Now, with everything assembled, it was time to calibrate the machine. Prusa says this is super easy, and that's true, but with 5 tools, it's also pretty tedious. You have to adjust the nozzle blocker wiper thingies, then loosen up the tool holders one by one, and with the tool head grabbing each tool and sort of holding things in place where they should be, you tighten everything down again. And before you finish that process, the stamped wrench they give you for that will have worn out. I was expecting something a little nicer here. Then you get to install a precision-made steel pin into the bed, and the printer uses the physical nozzle of each tool to measure the offset of each one. I was fully expecting a test print and the machine laying down some sort of an interference pattern with all the different tool combinations, and then you look at it and tell it like, yes, lines 7 and 8 match the best, but it turns out there is nothing to correct at this point because the machine literally just measured itself. And that's it. At this point, I connected it to Wi-Fi and added it into my Prusa Connect account. Thankfully, I could just yank the USB drive from the Mark IV and stick that into the XL to load my Wi-Fi name and password. That's still a text file you have to fill out on a PC, which, yes, is clunky, but honestly, I do prefer that over what most appliances do nowadays, which is requiring you to install an app that, for no doubt legitimate reasons, will only work after you give it access to your contacts, call history, and GPS location. This solution needs none of that, and Prusa is working on an on-screen keyboard, but that's coming soon, TM. But that's details, those will come later. I think I should actually just start with the machine itself. This is not just the Prusa XL, this is also the tool changer version, which adds a whole nother level to the machine. So you will probably have seen machines that have just one nozzle with one hot end, but then they'll have an array of filament inlets that can each feed into that one hot end. Prusa makes one, that's the MMU, you can get the Bamboo AMS, or if you have a Voron, there's the Enraged Rabbit Carrot Feeder. The common thing between all of these is that the printer only has one single hot end that's ever being pushed around. This XL has 5, with 5 nozzles, 5 extruders, and 1 moving head that can grab each tool one by one before or during a print. In fact, it can do multi-material and multi-color prints with thousands of fully automated tool changes per print. If you've seen the E3D tool changer, this is a very similar concept, just here it's a passive coupling mechanism. And the way it works is really neat. So the head has a bunch of these hardened rods installed, and the tools have mating pins that make sure that the tools are being registered to the exact same position every time without being over-constrained. Same as on the E3D tool changer. But then the clever bit is the locking mechanism here. So the head has 2 freely sliding bars, and with the 2 rolling pegs that are on each tool, they form sort of a linear bayonet mount. The entire thing is actuated just by the printer X and Y axes doing a bit of a dance, and that's it. So there are no extra motors or servos that actuate this coupling. It's pretty slick. So far, this tool changing action has worked flawlessly for me. The rest of the machine, aside of course from being bigger and a Core XY, is actually surprisingly similar to the Mark IV. You get the same neck extruder tools with a load cell and a bunch of extra sensors built into the hot end. They retain the one-piece nozzle brakes that still work with V6 nozzles with the adapter, but these neck extruders now have their own dwarf driver boards right on the toolhead. The software platform and the firmware is the same, and the usability you get and how it's all tied together with printables, Prusa Slicer, Prusa Connect, and then the printer itself just sort of getting out of the way and now also doing I'm a big printer things. Just printing stuff on the XL has been genuinely fun, and before I knew it, I had put over 150 hours on the printer just printing regular things. 36 centimeters cubed is a pretty comfortable size. But I have this machine to test it, and that also means doing some multi-material prints. If you're doing multicolor prints, you don't just have to worry about one filament, but 5. They all need to be loaded up, they need to be sufficiently dry, you need to have enough filament left on the spool, and if you're doing artsy stuff, they should have the right color. All 5 of them, or 4 in the case of this Shrek in armor that I printed. I think I actually did nail the colors on this one, but the first time I printed it, I thought I was being smart. Well, this is a multi-tool head printer. It shouldn't need that wasteful priming tower that Prusa Slicer generates, right? So I can just turn that off, right? Well, wrong. So while the tools are docked, there's a little silicone wiper that plugs the nozzle, but the hot ends still lose enough filament on the way from and to the dock that the print got completely ruined. With the wipe tower turned on, it did succeed. There was just a bit of stringing, especially this sort of matte brown filament that has a lot of filler stuff in it, so it prints kind of weird. But it's nothing that couldn't be cleaned off. Now, while I was at the Prague Maker Fair, I showed the results from this print to the folks at Prusa, and they were convinced that this wasn't at all what it should look like. Apparently, having perfectly dry filament is crucial when doing multi-tool printing. Even Miranda also saw it and suggested turning down the print temperatures to prevent this sort of stringing. But particularly, with the Prusa machines, I do expect the stock profiles to already be tuned by them for the best results. So I cracked open 4 brand new spools of Prusa Mint, and yeah, it ended up printing way better this time. I also retried the same G-code without the purge tower, and that also worked really well this time. There's some angel hairs still, and you can find some spots where the extruders didn't completely prime into the infill on some layers, but if you have parts that aren't as detailed, skipping the purge tower is something that you can absolutely do on the XL. The print with the purge tower used about as much filament for the tower as for the print itself, which compared to multiplexer printers, AMS, MMU, palette and so on, is actually pretty good. This block is mostly hollow. With this size print, multiplexers can use 3 times as much material for purging as for the print itself. For the stuff that I do with 3D printing, multicolor still is a bit of a gimmick, aside from doing 2-color labeling or something, which is actually super easy to do right in Prusa Slicer. I did think about doing some combined prints of the classic flexible plus rigid combination, or doing print-in-place egress bushings. They do make filament as well. But now that I have that option, it's just becoming another tool in the bag that I can use when it makes things easier. But if multi-material is a use case that you have, well, you will know what it is. The machine can definitely do it. While we're on the topic, it also prints flexibles like a champ, just once you manage to get the filament pushed in all the way up to the tool head. What I thought this would be more useful for me was making use of spools that had 20 or 50 grams of filament left on it, a little more than these, and then printing things like these sorting trays with those. IKEA used to sell no-jig trays at the perfect size to use for little seedling pots, but now they're only selling the smaller ones, so I modeled one up, roughly, and started printing them. For each filament and toolhead that you assign in the slicer, when you then start the print on the machine, you can assign it to a different toolhead or assign multiple toolheads to the same material from the G-code, and then have the machine automatically switch over to the next tool if one runs out. But there was a problem. Tool number 3 on my XL had calibrated itself way too high up now, and now was just pulling loose strands over the previous layer. This was odd, because the machine was pretty freshly calibrated, and when I was just using the different tools to keep different materials loaded up to then choose on the slicer, it worked perfectly. But in those cases, the selected tool would probe the bed itself, so of course any offsets there would get zeroed out. So I ran the calibration again. I made sure that each nozzle was perfectly clean, had it do the probing thing with the insert pin in the bed, and even checked if there was anything wrong with the hot end, the tool head itself, anything loose or something, but I couldn't find anything. And now tool number 3 was calibrated off in the other direction in Z. This is a bit too low now. I got in touch with Prusa support, and they suggested swapping toolhead 3 to a different spot to narrow down the issue. But interestingly, with tools 3 and 4 swapped, it was now calibrating all of them perfectly. This is just the perfect height. Maybe it was just replugging the connector that fixed this, but they were saying that if this is an issue that persists and is localized to one specific toolhead, their protocol is just, swapping out that toolhead and sending out a new one. But, once the calibration is done, it's not ever really going to change, even if you do nozzle swaps. This entire side quest is something that could have easily been avoided if the calibration process simply included a couple of test prints for manual fine-tuning. And I hope that's something that gets added in the setup wizard sooner than later. But now with the calibration being basically spot on, and having learned that the filament really needs to be bone dry for the tool changing to work properly, this is now just a machine that I can grab and use and do multi-material stuff with whenever I want. But actually, I mostly used it for single material prints, and it does that pretty well too. It of course does print those huge parts, but it also has absolutely no issues printing smaller parts as well. With the tool changer, you could even keep a couple different nozzle sizes loaded up and just pick in the slicer which size you want to use. I printed the same part on the Mark IV and on the XL using the same 0.2mm structural profile with input shaping, with the same super glossy Prusa jet black PTG that really highlights imperfections. And while they took exactly the same time to finish, The prints do look quite different overall. The XL got firmware 6.00 while I was testing it, and that included some stepper driver phase current tuning that made the printer smoother and quieter, but particularly on glossy prints, the motor steps still do show up. It's a bit better when the printer is going fast than when it's slowing itself down for cooling. And with prints that look a bit more organic, like the Shrek, or just don't use gloss black filament, it's an absolute non-issue. Because the XL naturally has that reverse Bowden built in, it stacks layers really neatly in the Z direction. Dimensionally, both of these prints are spot on, both for overall size and for smaller details, like hole sizes. Those also came out pretty much perfectly on the XL. That's just something that Prusa machines are always really good at. It makes designing parts that have to fit together really easy. If anything, input shaping and such in the firmware is tuned to undercompensate and not mess with the output too much. There is that 12-minute bonkers Benchy G-code as a demo, which, if you don't already, is not done quite to the speed Benchy rules, but it does print surprisingly nicely. The machine can clearly handle it, but I guess Prusa still found there was too much of a trade-off in overall output consistency that this ended up not being a profile that got included in Prusa Slicer. I think they should include some more extreme profiles, because even the speed profiles are a whole lot more conservative than what other printers use as their default settings. And just from what I've seen, many users tend to be much more impressed with zoomy print speeds than with overall accuracy or print quality. One is a lot easier to measure than the other, and if people prefer to make more of a trade-off to gain speed, I think it should be as simple as possible to make that trade-off yourself. Once you get the initial calibration and learning curve out of the way, the XL, like the other Prusa machines, just gets out of the way. And you do end up finding a lot of stuff where you think, hey, wouldn't it be cool if it did this? And then you find it already does it. Like these spool mounts, they work with cardboard spools and they extend to take 2 kilogram spools. Like you can literally just pull these out. Magnetic PEI coated beds. Still awesome, so much that, after the Mark III, they've become standard everywhere now. The way that the XL is designed to be fully usable even if you butt it up against the wall or, another XL in the back, and the fact that it fits perfectly on a 60 centimeter or 2 foot deep desk, there's clearly been thought put into this. Prusa Slicer is still one of the best parts of the machines, though of course now more and more competitors are also using their code. The Prusa machines generally are not printers that you have to or should want to tweak and mod. And while I think they nail the workflow and usability once everything is set up, there are still a couple of things that gave me pause for a second. What is the same for all XL variants, and in fact for all Prusa printers, is that while the online Prusa Connect does a good job of managing your printers and print queues, there's no first-party print camera. Sure, if you're just printing vanilla stuff, you don't really have to worry about things going wrong. But especially with bigger prints that can potentially consume multiple spools of filament in one job, it certainly would help with peace of mind. The problem is, the Prusa hardware architecture doesn't exactly allow for just plugging in a USB webcam. So the current workaround is, dedicating like an old smartphone to that job that has a web page open, and that then sends the phone's camera images to Prusa Connect. Alternatively, you can flash a ESP cam, which is even more effort. So yeah, this really should be a first-party integration if you want it. Then the XL's bed. This is a cool idea with 16 cells that each individually monitor and maintain their temperature, and only the areas of the bed that you use for a particular print will get heated, so that saves a bit of power. But with an extra controller board just for the bed and a bunch of electrical and mechanical connections down here, it is a very complex solution for a seemingly simple problem. It does get you close to perfectly even temperatures on the entirety of the bed, and according to Prusa, they did consider a bunch of alternatives, but apparently if you want a bed this large that also stays flat through heat cycles, this ended up being a very cost-effective solution, even if it seems like it's hopelessly over-engineered. Then Each of the Nextruder toolheads has a load cell built in that gives the printer tons of information about what's happening. But things like doing a filament swap still has you giving the printer feedback about a lot of stuff that I feel like it should be able to figure out by itself. Is the filament unloaded correctly? Has the extruder managed to grab the new filament? Am I extruding? In one of the newest updates, the load cell got an update that allows it to do filament jam detection while printing. Prusa has historically been pretty good about continuously improving their machines and especially, the software. And given how many sensors this thing has, I'm sure there's tons more stuff that is possible with this exact machine with just more software. But as always, even here, buy the product that it is now, not what it could be. Right now and for the foreseeable future, the XL is a bit of a unicorn. None of the stuff that I just mentioned is a deal breaker. On the one hand, if you compare it to a P1P, X1C, K1C, 2.4, or any of the other box-style Core XY input shaping machines, the XL is quite expensive and it doesn't really have that same wow factor of those. But it's also huge. This is almost 3 times the build volume of an X1. There we go. And the XL is not built for wow. Like I said, once you've figured it out, it really just gets out of your way and stops being something that you have to actively think about when printing stuff. It is an expensive printer if you look at it compared to the printers you most often see online. But is it really? This 5-head unit, as it stands here, is over 4,000 euros assembled, and the cheapest single tool one is still 2,100 euros if you build most of it yourself. If you look at, for example, Voron 2.4 kits for the 350mm one, they cost just as much. That printer platform, of course, has different pros and cons, sure, but it's in the same ballpark. But where it gets really ridiculous is at the other end of the market. There's a lot of ways that the XL is built with a professional or even, if you wanted, a corporate environment in mind, and there's just nothing that can compete. Even if you're just trying to find a printer that's this big and not a Creality bedslinger, that's a tough call. There's lots of printers in the 4,000 to 8,000 euro range from the likes of Ultimaker, maybe Raise 3D, Markforged, that do somewhere in the neighborhood of 330 by 240 millimeters. But the XL is 360 in all dimensions. The only machines I could find in the Pro segment that are close in build dimension to the XL were either RFQ, so those are going to be like 25 grand plus a service contract, or the Ultimaker Method XL, which is an enclosed dual extruder, about 300 millimeters cubed printer at a cool 15,000 euros. And I don't know about you, but in that context, 4,000 euros for 5 extruders starts sounding like an absolute steal. Corpos might even say that this is suspiciously cheap. I don't think XL quite communicates how unique of a proposition the Prusa XL is with the combination of an A-tier European manufacturer, huge print volume, and multi-extrusion. But because it's such a unicorn, it took me a while to figure out calibration and filament requirements, but now we're good. I personally probably wouldn't get the 5 toolhead one, but maybe just the dual head version for engineering prints, or if it did exist, perhaps a fixed head, single head, MMU version. While we're doing wish lists here, I still do wish that there was some version of the XL that brought this a bit closer towards the usual consumer or maker price bracket. Simplifying the design. Take out all the things that you don't absolutely need and maybe make it an XL Lite. I think that's what I was originally expecting the XL to be, but it's a good bit more than that. For me, this XL is going to become one of my go-to large machines. I have it, so I'm just going to put it to work. And it's also going to be a bit of an experimental platform when it comes to combining materials and printing techniques that you just can't do on a single tool machine. If you have experiments that you'd like me to try out, leave a comment below. As always, a big shout out to everyone who's supporting the channel through Patreon, YouTube memberships, or just by watching and sharing the videos. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching, keep on making, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.